So, as I said before, the purpose of this discussion is to talk about the fact that DevOps is an imperfect science. You know, we're imperfect people. So, you know, but we live in a society and working environment that really celebrates perfection. And, you know, you can't do that with DevOps. So, you know, not only is there no growth when you strive for perfection or when everything is perfect, it's also pretty boring. So, we want to make sure that folks understand that it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to mess up. It's okay to do that fail fast thing and live to tell about it. So, in the spirit of living to tell about it and not being boring, we are happy to share our experiences, or these guys are happy to share their experiences. And we'll, hopefully you guys will walk away with some hopefully good information. So, without further ado, Guido, I'm going to start with you. First question. So, what are some of the most obvious kind of smack my head pitfalls that you have run into? So, in other words, you know, what do you consider to be like your most notable failure that you've experienced in DevOps, and how have you lived to tell about it?
How much time do we have? No, I mean, seriously, so one of the biggest, we started a project about 2 years ago to break up a monolith, and one of the first things we did is like grab 6 or 7 different testing tools and started to put them in a single unified pipeline, unified view. You know, kind of the idea of success for that project was, okay, let's be able to deploy this thing every 24 hours, let's move faster. Very soon we discovered that even though that was a fair goal, there were a bunch of other different things we needed to solve first. So it was kind of, okay, in retrospect, that's sort of obvious, but it's interesting to reflect like how the success criteria for a project gets changing as time evolves. Because, for example, we realized we needed to make an inventory of who owns every single line of code in that monolith. In order to get, you know, kind of coverage assignment and who needs to work on what whenever we found an issue. So again, like you set out, you know, for a journey, and then very soon we realized, okay, I need to first do a lot of pre-work to even get ready to go to kind of the actual work. So it's not necessarily failure in the sense that, you know, you don't get to that goal, but you realize that that goal is maybe not this year's goal, and you need to really work you know, with the rest of the stakeholders to make sure that they're on the same page, and then they understand that even though you're going in that direction, there's a lot of stuff that you need to get to first.
Excellent, excellent. Do any of you guys have anything?
Yeah, I would say one of the major stumbling blocks, I know when coming into Red Hat, I've been at Red Hat almost 5 years, and trying to really bring DevOps or CI/CD into the culture was a rude awakening of how the culture is at Red Hat, and like really taking input from people, identifying opinions and involving them in the process is key. You know, just rolling something out and saying, here's how we're going to do this, or here's the process is not, I found, the best way to do it. You really need involvement from those different teams and buy-in that they have skin in the game. So that's definitely something that I learned at Red Hat. We since, you know, really have gone from, I would say, originally when I started, a more waterfall model to a agile DevOps, and you really break down into teams that are all heavily invested for their specific products, but they are kind of invested in building that DevOps and building out your CI/CD workflows. And I would say the key thing, too, that I found is you really want to identify for specific products, since Red Hat has many products, what is the best process and workflow for those products. You know, you may say, here's some great technology, does it apply? You really don't know that. You really need to define that process technology, and workflow first before you kind of pick the technology or what's going to work.
So one thing I learned at Intuit about what not to do is to never let your customers know that you're going through this journey. That means that you have to find a way to make sure your releases are always functional and everything under the hood works really smoothly. And one thing over the course of the different years, we've learned that release flags are really critical when you do journeys like this, especially in terms of continuous integration and delivery. You want to be able to dynamically control the variables in a way that you can control and do a canary release or deployment. So those are the things I would leave you with of not thinking about. If you're not thinking about it, definitely do think about release flags, blue-green deployments, canary deployments in a way that can you can roll out software incrementally and be able to still have sanity in the health of the releases.
I'll add to Ari's answer. At Electronic Arts, we have a variety of different teams that we work with. I'm on a centralized team that provides CI and CD services to those different groups, and where possible, we guide them through their DevOps transition. Now, many of those teams will be very different. Some will be for mobile games. Some will be for console or PC games, servers that players connect to, or internal services. The problem that we made was trying to look at standardization across all of these groups. You really need to look at what your goal of standardization is and whether or not it's going to make sense. Where you have customers that are very disparate, don't try and use the exact same solution for all of them.
That makes perfect sense.
But lessons learned.
Right, exactly, exactly. So, Guido, you brought up the concept of, kind of the target moving. You had certain parameters for success that you thought were there, but things changed, and so you had to get the stakeholders involved in as well. So, is that something that you guys have grappled with, and how have you addressed it?
I would say is communicate often. So whatever ideas that you have or the process workflows is check in with those teams as frequently as possible and get constant feedback. This way you don't go too far down the road and they're like, yeah, we didn't buy into that, or we're not on board with that. Again, it gets them getting their opinions out there and expressing in this way. They feel like, well, I'm taking part in this. This is us. It's not just someone else dictating to me what needs to be done there. So yeah, that's my example.
No, I think.
I think one of the other parameters for success is also looking towards the future and identifying not what is your customer group or group that you're embedded in going to need now, but what are they going to need soon, and making sure that you're prepared to scale up appropriately. Sorry, I should say scale appropriately, because that might not just be up, it might be out across multiple instances. So really try and anticipate the needs of the group that you're working with further into the future than you might have initially done.
So I would say speed of delivery is an important parameter of success. You want to look at least a couple of KPIs when you start, right? Defining what does success mean for this. At Intuit, what we realized is check-in to release was one of our key metric for success when we got into the journey. And our goal was a lofty goal of check-in to release in less than 45 minutes. I am happy to report with some of the amazing work that we have done with modern SaaS and in the cloud. For some services, we've been able to achieve check-in to release in less than 20 minutes. So you really want to look at check-in to release, and beyond that, also your resiliency and availability of your services, right? How long does it take for you to get your system back to a healthy state? What is your mean time to recovery? Those are going to be a critical parameters of how your organization is scaling for DevOps.
So have you guys, any of you, run into a situation where you had some established parameters for success and they did change midstream and it wasn't communicated correctly, or somebody didn't get the memo? Yes? No? Yeah. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but listen, you guys are here to tell your stories, so don't make me look bad.
As mentioned, we work with a variety of different teams within EA, and all of those teams are working according to their own schedules. Those schedules change rapidly, and as a centralized team that is embedded but not always as close as we'd like within those teams, there have definitely been cases where we've missed out on some communication that would have changed what we would have done probably can't give particular
No,
examples
that's
on that
fine,
one.
but, well, actually, Daniel, how did you deal with that then? I mean, was it
Really, a big part of that was integrating further, making sure that we're present in all of the meetings where any decisions that impact schedule are going to be made, making sure that more communication tools are being used, obviously things like Slack, et cetera. Really just integration within the team and making sure that all of our downstream partners or customers are going to be understand the requirements of our group in order to help provide them with what they need.
so it's all about communication?
Oh, always.
Okay. All right. Great. All right.
Yeah, I was just going to add, the communication part, even having meetings, well, not for meetings for the sake of meetings, but really just checking in at certain checkpoints to say, this is what we plan to deliver, this is, what we agreed upon, is that really kind of just reaffirming and making sure. I found, and doing it more frequently, even though it becomes, something that has to be done, it's worth it in the end because you get the end result is you both are happy with what came out of the process.
Do you guys find value in stand-ups?
What was that?
Did you find value in having stand-ups?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, for example, we are heavily distributed geographically over 3 continents, and we have different models. Some teams are distributed, some teams are co-located, and definitely finding the right time to do stand-ups, particularly for the teams that are distributed, is key. And that is one of the things that, typically, going back to your previous question in terms of what went wrong in communication, I mean, that's some of the things that happen around rolling out a change. I don't know, there's a new required check in a pipeline, or there's something, and then, all of a sudden you have an office that wakes up on Monday, or even in Israel, they work on Sunday, and if you don't think about those things, I mean, you can have very easily go into problems, and you have 80 people that can't just work because there's another check in the pipeline that is not making sense to them.
I would say the other key thing too that I've noticed in doing stand-ups just in general is that you may be blocked on something, but someone on your team has a solution for you. And that's, that goes a long way, that you can get that solution right there at the stand-up, or have a follow-up conversation after stand-up is done to kind of tie the loop off, tie that off and figure out what you're blocked on, why you're blocked, and can they help you? They've done that before. I would say the other key thing outside of stand-ups is demoing your work. The tooling or whatever you're working on is showing that, because someone may say, well, have you thought of this? Can you improve it this way? And you get that feedback, which is extremely helpful.
Just to add to that, one of the other benefits of stand-ups can be avoiding replication of work. On our team, we try and encourage each of our engineers to have some time to look at different processes that can be improved, things that might not be a task already assigned to them, but an opportunity. You can easily run into a problem if your team is large enough where you have multiple people trying to come up with a new solution for the same problem. That can be encouraged if you know everyone's working on that, if they're trying different solutions. But avoiding replication of work is always nice to have.
So one thing I would add with respect to stand-up is, especially for critical product launches, what we do at Intuit, we have leadership stand-ups, where we continuously communicate about what's going well, what's not going well, where we need help. And that I've seen really work well in terms of communication, closing the gap, escalations, and making sure that we are right on time for the launches.
All right. Great. So let's shift gears a little bit, talk about tooling. So that's, Ari, you're ready to talk.
Yeah, I think when we started this out, we were saying to me, the people and the culture and addressing the process is the most important, but obviously at some point you have to either pick tooling or you're going to develop your own tooling. And it's easy to get blindsided by, or not blindsided, but get distracted by the shiny new tool that's come out and it offers you X, Y, and Z and all these great features, right? But at the end of the day, you want to pick something that's going to be stable, that's going to work in your environment. It's worth doing a POC to see how that's going to work, or maybe even beyond a POC and reach for MVP or if a viable product, and basically give you a sense of this will work in your workflow. I'll give an example from some of the work that we did. When I started at Red Hat, we were loading Jenkins in a Rev environment, which you're treating them as pets, and rolling them out with the jobs via Jenkins Job Builder at the time for freestyle jobs or matrix jobs. Everyone who's worked with Jenkins probably is familiar with that to some extent. But really then looking at that and seeing, was that going to be useful throughout all of the organizations? Is it flexible enough? Is it easy for developers to come on board and QE folks to work with that? And we kind of gravitated towards using our own products in that sense of, well, Jenkins really doesn't need to be this system that's always up and running on a VM, and we've kind of gravitated towards using OpenShift as our platform and running Jenkins inside of that to do some of the CI/CD work. So very similar to the themes that you're hearing at the conference around cloud native Jenkins. We embraced that probably 3 years ago, and it's heavily integrated to OpenShift, and it's been very beneficial to us. Now that said, it may not work for everyone, right? Everyone has a different use case, and again, it goes back to identifying what's going to work for your organization, and then broken down what's going to work for each of those products in your organization if you have multiple products. And I don't know if anyone else wants to add on tooling or.
So my take on tooling is you have to get the tool to be an enabler for your culture, right? And that really is going to be your propeller for ensuring success at DevOps. So once you define that this is what you need, you want to be able to have your tools completely change the culture. And at Intuit, we invest quite a bit on modern SaaS platform. This is basically a containerized platform. And I would also recommend looking into heavily investing in automation of build and testing pipelines, right? So test itself is pretty costly, and you want to look at inverting your test pyramid at some point. If you're heavily into manual testing, you're doing a lot of functional and end-to-end testing manually, you want to look at inverting that pyramid. That has really changed the way that we used to deploy and develop software, and that has helped us a lot.
One thing that I would want to add when you're looking at your tooling is, where possible, try and go for loosely coupled tools. Often throughout your DevOps journey, you're going to find the need to replace one tool with another, swap things out, even just version upgrades, et cetera, et cetera. Where possible, having that loose coupling makes that a lot easier. If there are integration features that you're looking for that require a tighter coupling, that may justify introducing that technical debt, or it may be something that you might try and replicate through another means. But always look at the cost of going for something that is tightly coupled over loosely coupled.
I would say too, one of the main things is you want to have, whatever tooling you decide to use, it should be frictionless as possible. You don't want to overburden your already burdened developers or QE teams that are looking for something to make their lives easier or better with more debt or more technical debt or more things to consider. And you know, it's okay to iterate over that. So you may have a solution that works 80% of the way, and it's okay to do that, and then iterate to get to that 100% of frictionless in your process.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to tooling is, one thing to keep in mind is make sure you're aligned with the philosophy of the tools that you're using in terms of, you know, you're using them for what they were meant to be used. Sometimes you get excited about a tool and it's just, oh, I know, I want to use this tool, and you end up using it in a super weird way. And you know, if it's a new creative way and then like the maintainers of the tool are aligned with that, that's awesome. You can contribute back, perfect. But sometimes you end up being like a corner case in the design of the tool. You end up you make lose support, or you're always using the tool in the wrong way. It's not a good thing. Typically, it's a symptom of you get overly excited with something, and you need to rethink whether that's the right tool for the job.
So what about culture when we're talking about the tools that you guys use? How much does that play into your selection, and ultimately, you know, do you make any enemies when you adopt certain tools over others? I mean, how do you deal with that? I imagine that somebody somewhere along the line has gotten a little upset that their particular tooling hasn't.
Yeah, I think you have to pay attention to culture and what is the right tooling for your culture, but also tooling can be a little bit of a push for your culture on the right way. So there's always going to be some friction in terms of if you adopt a tool that's completely opposed to your culture, you're only going to get no one using it. But if you adopt a tool that's shifting you in the right direction just enough, that could be a good type of friction to get the organization in moving the right way. What we did at Medallia was work with kind of asking around, see who is excited about this new tool, and then working more like a kind of a bottoms-up approach with them, finding teams that would be excited to work on that, even if it was kind of something new, and even if it was kind of more like an experiment type of thing. And then make them your champions. Let them speak for you instead of you just going to have to do all the evangelization. Particularly in a geographically distributed organization, that's key. Having people in every geography that can do that for you. And then once you find that that's working, find a top-down approach to standardize, if that makes sense. I mean, again, not every time standardization is gonna make sense, but if it does, starting bottoms up and then standardizing top-down is what we found works best for us.
I would say too, just to add to that is, coming from Red Hat, we're an open source organization or company, and the tool choice has to be open source based. That's definitely key. I would say too is not to always get tied to specific tools. So there may be one team or one product team that wants to use one versus another. I think that's okay. As long as you're still delivering on the process flow at the end of the day, then it kind of gives more onus on them that they feel like they're included, they're using what they think is the best solution, but the output is the same, and no one gets affected by that as long as the process stays the same.
So my experience is similar to Gado's in the sense that we go for a bottoms-up approach as well, and once there is a tool out there, there is definitely a group of engineers who are passionate about it, and we try to build a POC around it and build a case. And then these folks become the change agents for us to roll out the process. I'll also leave you with the fact that the one thing that really worked well for us at Intuit when we rolled out DevOps is the end-to-end culture we developed. By that, what we mean is a developer owns everything from inception to delivery. So there is no roles like quality, operations, development, etc. A developer plays multiple roles. So for that, in order for that to work, you really need to invest a lot in automation and tooling, and that's what really helped us.
Okay. All right, Daniel, you have anything you want to add? You don't have to. Okay. All right. Great. So, have any of you run into the situation where the tooling that you chose did cause strife in the organization, or were there any issues related to that you guys had to overcome?
Yeah, definitely. I can add my perspective. Tooling is an agile process, in my opinion. There is always an iteration that goes on. For example, initially when we started at Intuit, one of our continuous delivery platform was Spinnaker, and we iterated on it. We found that when we were deploying it, we had challenges with rollback. We had to go back and revisit different kinds of tool. Now we have moved into Argo CD. So tooling is definitely an iterative process. You want to start with what you have, and when you are able to roll out and when you scale, you're going to identify problems. And that's when being adaptable to change is really going to be the key as you strengthen and solidify your process.
I think one area where we saw some resistance to particular technologies or tooling was actually looking at Jenkins plugins. I mentioned that my group works with a large number of very disparate, very distinct types of customers within electronic arts who are all trying to build very different things. As a result, there are definitely plugins or workflows that are going to work for some of those but not others, and trying to impose or standardize them across everyone can lead to some resistance. Looking at where standardization matters or doesn't really helps provide you with the flexibility needed to be the best partner to the team you're working with. That's especially true with the teams that we've been most integrated with and following more of a DevOps path with rather than just providing CI/CD.
All right, great. Moving on then. Excuse me, Gary, in some of our earlier conversations, you had mentioned continuous delivery as kind of an issue that's caused issues in the past. So can you
Right.
kind of talk about that again a little bit and
Yeah,
what you're
sure.
seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So continuous delivery is hard and nobody has mastered it, right? Continuous integration is a good start, it's easy to have. But when you do a CD, you are like literally live and every day. And the big thing that we ran into roadblocks when we did continuous delivery was first to start with a single branch master trunk model. When we start that, developers are really hesitant to go into the master branch model, trunk model, because you have every check-in you check in is ready to go all the way into production. And how do you do that? That requires a lot of engineering discipline and processes to be really tight control. And I've already talked a little bit about our modern SaaS platform. Basically, what we did was we developed a set of tools and processes around a continuous integration and delivery pipeline, and we had strict controls over when to deploy and what to deploy. And the key things that worked well for us are focusing more on our deployment strategies, making sure that we are building self-healing into the code, right? You want to build application and infrastructure resiliency into your application code. And how do we do that? That's really based on your implementation of Hystrix model, fail fast, or fallback. And building some of that during your building phase really helped us.
Anyone else? Okay. All right, great. Let's go back to, Daniel, what you were talking about having the software loosely coupled, the tooling loosely coupled, because one of the things that we've talked about is plugins, using plugins and some of the challenges associated with those. So what are some of the things, the challenges that you're seeing using plugins, and how did your organization kind of get past that?
Cool. That's a great topic for my team to talk about. Working with a lot of different customers, each of whom might be looking at Jenkins and the wealth of plugins available, we end up with a lot of people who want to use a plugin that exists. So they'll go and grab something from the open source community, which is fantastic, and often they'll identify that maybe it doesn't quite fit a need that they have. It's close, but not quite there. So what ends up happening is someone forks the plugin, makes changes, and then we sit on that change. And it's held locally, and it's technical debt. And every time a new version of that plugin comes out and we want to integrate those changes, it becomes a pain point. So what I would encourage everyone to do is, as you're looking at plugins and adopting them, and in the worst case, forking them, don't start doing that until you have your plan for contributing those changes back out to the open source. This is something my team has been getting a lot better at. We're still far from perfect, but if you don't know how you're going to contribute it back out, how that works within your organization or company, hold off on forking it for the time being. Otherwise, you're just introducing a lot of pain in the future.
Excellent. Okay, go ahead.
The only thing I was going to add about plugins is really it is worth identifying what the core plugins that you need and not to throw in the kitchen sink when looking at plugins. A lot of the topics have been, one of the topics coming up at a presentation is configuration as code, and that's what we've done with our Jenkins is control the plugins versions, and it's part of actually setting up Jenkins inside of OpenShift. So it's like rolling out a new application for us. Instead of I have a VM and I have to update that plugin every time, I can have a stage environment that validates my new set of plugins and then gets rolled out into production for people that are using that Jenkins master, for example.
Excellent, excellent. You should hold on to the mic because I got a question for you.
Actually, I
Oh,
just
okay,
want
go
to
ahead,
add to
go
that. The comment I made previously about loose coupling of tooling is particularly applicable to plugins. If you look at the dependencies of a plugin that you're using, they may include a ton of things that you don't end up wanting that you then have to account for when you're doing upgrades, planning version changes, etc. So keep in mind what you're pulling in as a result of that one small feature that you want.
Okay, next question, and actually I'd like all of you guys to answer this, but I'm going to start with Ari. How do you measure success with your DevOps implementations in your organization?
Yeah, it's one thing to implement CI and CD. It's another thing to measure that, right? And I think what it comes down to is you have to be able to, all the data that you're getting from your system, your end-to-end pipelines or your CI/CD pipelines that you're running, you have to be able to measure that data. So maybe that is, in our case, what we did is we have a elk stack on the back end that collects that data logs, and we can then search that. We actually are using the InfluxDB plugin as an example, which then shoots the data into a database, and then we can we use Grafana to graph that and show that information. Now, a lot of developers and QE folks, why do I have to do that, right? What is the value? And really, it's really kind of to show like, oh, we've increased efficiency here by running these pipelines, or our burn down is much faster now. Like these are the things that you get out of having that data, and obviously your management layer will thank you for it. That's information that they can look at and glean of like, okay, this is what it's going to take us to deliver this feature in the next. For the next release, and this is what, based on what we have this data from before. So I think it's very valuable, and it's not something that's tedious. You can push that data as you're running your pipelines and get that on the fly.
Yeah, so I add to that, I mean, there's like two parts of that what we do at Medallia. One is like more like the hard part, which is like metrics, KPIs on the pipelines, KPIs on the teams in terms of delivery, time to recover, it's different metrics on those. There's also another aspect, which is Medallia is like a customer experience management company. So we do like our own kind of customer experience management internally. And the question we ask is like, how likely are you to recommend like working at Medallia, and particularly around tools? That there's different questions. And the aha moment we had was like, you can't really measure developer productivity. But we said, happy developers are productive developers, and like probably works both ways. So we use happiness as another KPI. Like, if you're happy working with the tools, typically that means you feel productive, and the converse, like if we feel like, like that metric is going down, it's a good time to start asking why, and that could be a symptom for something deeper that you're not measuring.
Interesting.
I think in addition to the metrics that have already been mentioned, a big one to look at is what functionality or capabilities are you enabling that weren't previously available for people? With a number of our teams, we've offered the ability for engineers to add their own new Jenkins jobs, add their own tooling, et cetera, in order to verify or get some information that they wanted that they couldn't previously do, or that was too onerous to do manually before. So in addition to looking at your time to consumer, your MTTR, et cetera, I'm really looking at like what new things have you provided that people couldn't or wouldn't do previously.
So other than the speed and velocity metrics, the thing that I found really useful is the employee engagement and the developer NPS scores. So that like really turned around when we did the DevOps journey. Our developers were really understanding the need, and also could really feel that their productivity has increased so much that they are ready to take on any new thing. And I would recommend looking at some of those scores in your organization as you think about this.
All right, great. So we are running up at the top of the hour. So I just want to close this with one more question for all of the panelists, which is, if there was one thing that you wanted these guys to walk away with, what would it be?
Invest in your tooling.
Configuration as code. You've heard it. If you're not already doing it, just give it a try. It makes things so much better and faster.
You stole my thunder. I would say listen to your customers, listen to your teams, be open to their opinions. It's not to say like you're going to take everyone's opinion, because you're never going to please everyone, but definitely listen to what they have to say, and see how you can bring value add back to them.
And I'll say, I mean, I think this was in the keynote earlier this morning, like create an environment for innovation, and then like get out of the way.
Yeah. All good advice. Thank you, gentlemen, and Gary. Great stuff. Guys, just want to open it up. We have time for maybe one or two questions, if you guys have any. Anyone? Yes. Let me run over to you. Can't see
So what you said, it was really interesting, but I just feel that you're in a very different, or your company, your teams are in a very different level what I've been working lately. And my question is, what would you do with resistance to change? You see, not all team members are willing to participate in some initiatives. And even though you invite them to meetings and you try to be open with them and talk to them, listen, trying to get them to say something, right? And they don't seem to want to be part of it. What can you do to make them part of the culture change? Because we know that that's part of the company, but some people don't want to be part of that change.
So resistance to change.
So what I'll say,
Resistance to change.
what I'll say is, if you find at least one person or two people that are interested in working with you, like it doesn't matter. Like even if you find those people, like just a really small team can start creating change inside an organization. Like if you can really prove value, and like just get hard facts, right? I mean, it's like we used to have this many issues, now we have this less amount, or like improve some metric and start showing that. So if I think initially, I mean, and I don't know if this is the best way to do it. Like initially, like even if you had to say, okay, I'll stay late and I'll find my time to build a prototype or a POC or something, and then prove value, then you can change the nature of the conversation with the other folks, because it's harder to reject that value when it's more like based on facts.
Yeah, I would say what helps those people to change is having successes with others. So if you have success stories or things to point to of like, we made these changes, we've moved in this direction, and look what we've benefited from it, similar to what you said, is that then shows them, okay, maybe this is worthwhile and I need to invest in it, and I need to be part of that change, and I can contribute to that as well.
I think also trying to drive empathy and understanding between both parties, understanding where they're coming from and what's driving their resistance. It could be that they misunderstand part of the process and anticipate pain points that may not actually be present. It may be missing that they have needs that you're not sufficiently capturing, that if you understood better, you'd be able to provide information that helps them out. It can often just be due to a misunderstanding. However, if that isn't the case, as these guys have mentioned, really pointing out success stories, establishing those where you can, that goes very far.
All right, great. Guido, Ari, Daniel, and Gowrie, thank you so much for sharing your insight. I got a lot out of it. And guys, thank you very much for being patient as we work through our technical difficulties. And I hope you all have a great day. Thanks for joining us.